Hello, everyone. My name is Madeline Coffey. I am joined today by the incomparable Tom Cipullo. Our conversation is part of Martial Opera's Oral History Project. Thank you so much, Tom, for being a part of this and asking me to be a part of it. Before we hop into the questions, I just am going to read a little bit of Tom's bio, and then we'll get into it. Tom Cipullo is a composer celebrated for his inexhaustible imagination and originality. Tom is a recipient of prestigious awards like the 2012 Guggenheim Fellowship and the 2013 Arts and Letters Award. Tom's works have been widely performed in the US and internationally, and his opera Glory Denied stands out as one of the most frequently performed contemporary operas of our time. His operas tackle powerful stories like Mayo, which explores the eugenics movement, and Josephine, a vibrant portrayal of Josephine Baker. Tom's music has been described as intriguing and unconventional, and he's known for his skill in writing for the voice. With numerous commissions and awards to his name, he brings a unique voice to the world of contemporary opera. So with that, let's dive into your journey and some of your inspirations. So if we
Great.
could,
I have to say, Madeline, that was
yeah,
the nicest introduction I've ever had.
thank you.
I don't expect I'll ever have as nice an introduction again.
Thank
And
you.
before you give me, and I know I can tell by the look on your face that you've prepared excruciatingly difficult questions to ask me. So before those begin, I'm going to ask you, can you
Okay.
say how we met?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Well, I felt like I met you a lot earlier than I actually met you because I was exposed to your music as an undergraduate at Indiana University. And first to your song repertoire and then later to your operatic repertoire. And was entranced by it, was obsessed with it. And uh, a mutual colleague of ours, introduced me to Valeria's aria from your opera Mayo, and I was singing that for about a year before I met you in person in Charlottesville with the Ader Emerging Artist Program at Charlottesville Opera, and you had come to do a contemporary opera workshop with the Ader Emerging Artists, and I was lucky enough to be a part of that. And we worked on Valeria's aria at the time I was singing soprano repertoire. And we also did another ensemble together. Was it Sleeping? Is it called Sleeping?
Oh, snoring, maybe.
Snoring. Yeah. Which is
Snoring.
hilarious. And so I've been just such an admirer of yours for years in advance of our meeting. And then we
Well,
finally did
that's
meet, and here we are again. So I'm so
here
happy
we
to
are again.
trust.
The reason I brought it up is we met in Charlottesville, really,
Yeah,
right? Is that right?
that's right.
And I just want to mention Charlottesville because Caroline Moore is doing such great things down there, and I've been lucky to meet some wonderful artists. But when you meet a wonderful artist who's also one of the nicest, most considerate people you ever meet,
Truly.
that's Caroline.
Yeah.
And it's just fun to think about her and think about the good time we all had down there in Charlottesville.
Yes, yes. Caroline is fantastic and has introduced me to so many wonderful people in this industry. And
Yeah,
um, so, yeah,
great things are happening there.
wonderful. Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so now without further ado, into my question.
Okay, into the questions.
Could you start off by telling us about your earliest musical memories and influences?
Well, my father was a musician. He was a jazz musician. He loved jazz, but he made his living playing society gigs and club dates and things all around New York in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and then in Florida after that. So there was always music in our home.
Okay.
And my older brother became a drummer. When you're a teenager, you have to rebel a little bit. So my older brother, he didn't want to play. He became a rock drummer. And I had to rebel. We all went into music, but I had to rebel. I went into the highly lucrative classical music realm. And so, I don't know, we were always around musicians. A lot of times you'd have musicians who had been kicked out of their homes, staying on our couch even.
Really?
So that was the topics of the day.
Wow. So what was your first instrument?
Piano.
Piano.
We had a little piano, a Lester. It had 76 keys, was in our music room, this tiny little room with my father's bass. And but it was a wonderful little piano. And it was a lot of fun to learn on. I started when I was 5. Neighborhood, amazing the teachers I've had. This neighborhood young man, his name was Robert Yodis, and he was very talented. He was going to Manhattan School of Music, and eventually he became a set designer
Wow.
and won an Obie Award for set design. He was
Oh,
just all things musical, all things artistic, I should say. Wonderful,
okay.
Robert Yodis. Tragically, he took his own life at a time when, time being gay in the 60s, there was so much pressure. And it's heartbreaking even now to think about it, but he had an incredibly talented man. And then, can I keep going, Madeline?
Yeah,
Then I
please.
had another interesting teacher my father got, Graham Forbes, who was this pianist who was Frank Sinatra's accompanist for a while in the 50s. And he was just a phenomenal musician. He could be one of those guys who plays any song in any key, anything. I never learned that. I never mastered that skill at all, but he was a great teacher too.
Wow.
So those are very interesting teachers I had, as well
Yeah.
as a gentleman in Huntington named Frank Lowney. I had a number of wonderful piano teachers.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. So at what point did you find a love for composition and when did you feel like you had a gift for that or what drew you to composition?
Those are two very separate questions. When
Okay.
did I find I had a gift? I'm still not sure. But when when was I drawn to it? I think, there was this wonderful high school teacher named William Westcott. So many of us, right, have had these mentors who are high school teachers or junior high school teachers. And he was such an interesting guy. In the 60s, he was the first high school teacher with long hair who was cool. Everybody wanted to hang out with him. And he sort of got me into writing music. But then you did ask a question and up until the time I was 18, I didn't know what I was going to do really, or 17. I thought I'd go to college, maybe become a history teacher. Then I thought, you know what, I like music. I'll go to college and I'll go to college and I'll become a music teacher. I loved, that'd be a fun thing to do for my life. But I was in college and, one of my best friends said to me, "Why are you studying music education? You hate kids." And then I had to say, "Well, you may be right. I don't really like kids that much." He said, "Why don't you just do music?" And
Yeah.
then that changed things. And so that ended that dream of music teacher, and I just wound up studying music.
Well,
But Madeline, your question made me think, when did I feel like I had a gift for it? That's interesting because, I was never, I mean, it took me a long time to find what I wanted to do and where I wanted to do it. I think, I mean, maybe, I'm in good company with Haydn and probably a number of others. Some people are so talented, so young. I
hmm.
was never that way. I was a workaholic. I had to make
Okay.
myself into something. Even though I had great, great teachers who showed me the way.
Yeah.
But it took me a long time, if I have indeed figured out what I'm doing. It took me an awful long time to figure out what I'm doing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a very relatable feeling for young artists specifically, myself included. It's
Well, you
interesting.
singers, I have to interrupt you singers. You go a long time before your instrument is really developed, right? You're all on a marathon.
Yes.
It's it's persistence. That's what makes a singer.
Yeah. And a hunger to I think a hunger to learn new music, new things, meet new people, be in new productions, just that hunger to experience more. And that's one thing about music. I think that's specifically interesting is there's really no limit to the kind of experiences you could have. Um, so take that how you will. Um,
Nice.
what you said something about uh how you had thought maybe you wanted to be a history teacher. And I think that's really interesting. I'm jumping a little bit in my line of questioning, but a lot of your operas and the storytelling that you do is rooted in history. The Vietnam War, Josephine Baker, um, these stories, Mayo. Um, do you feel like those two interests have been something you consciously brought together in your work?
Not consciously, and until you mentioned it, I didn't realize it. But for me, I mean, I've always been interested in history, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
really fun,
Mhm.
and it's a wonderful thing to know. And I think it's very important for opera nowadays, to reflect the times, reflect the things we're interested in. So that's what drew me to Glory Denied,
Right.
uh, because it is all about that era I grew up in, the 60s and the 70s.
Sure.
It's amazing, I'm sure you do, but a lot of young people don't realize how much the Vietnam War impacted our country and continues to
Mm.
today. There's all these things that came out of that. Do your own thing, the counterculture, distrust of government, all these wonderful struggles for rights for marginalized and disenfranchised people. So many things came out of that. And, our country's so divided today, but if you live through the 60s, either the 1960s or 1860s,
Yeah.
you have a certain confidence that we will pull out of this because we may have been equally divided in our past and
Mm.
found our way back home. That's
Mm.
my hope, anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. Well, well, I think we might circle back to Glory Denied in a moment, but I wanted to sort of zoom out a second and ask you, you've composed a lot of vocal music, not just opera, but also song cycles, vocal ensembles, various voice plus instrument groupings. What is it about the human voice that continues to hold your attention and inspire you? And how is it different from composing for other instruments?
Well, that's a great question. I think there's a couple answers to that. One, I just grew up in a household listening to the Great American Songbook. Gershwin was
Yeah.
my father's favorite composer, and we heard tons of Frank Sinatra, and we heard lots and lots of vocal music. So that was my natural inclination. I think it's an Italian or Italian American inclination too to seek out the voice. That's in our genes somehow.
Yeah.
Um, but also, when I was going to college in the 70s, it was an era where dissonance, we call it dissonance, but it's really consonance because everything is consonant, right? But where a rather severe style held sway.
Mm.
And there was less tolerance for people who wanted to write tonal music. Now that's all changed. Nowadays, you go to college and it's people are thankfully free to write whatever they want
Mhm.
and be respected for that, for the choices they make. But it certainly wasn't that way in the 70s. You were looked down on if you wrote tonal music. You were considered stupid.
Hmm.
So I wrote, I wrote a whole bunch of really bad music. And I wrote for some singers, and I was going to Boston University, and one of the comp teachers, not my personal teacher, but one of the teachers said, "That was good. Write more songs. I've written some songs. Write some more songs. That was good." It's the first nice thing that guy ever said to me in all the years that I was there. So I thought, maybe I should do this.
Mm.
And when you write for singers, you could be a little more tonal,
Right.
because some people will say, "Oh, the singer, they got to find their note." That's all nonsense, of course. Singers can do anything, but you were given a little more sway if you wrote vocal music, so that appealed to me.
Mhm.
So, as a friend of mine said, "Go where it's warm," and that is where it was warm for me. Um, and if I have any kind of small gift, that's where it resides in writing music for voices, and it's fun. Hey,
Yeah.
Madeline, you know what I just thought of? I have to mention this. They used to say, you can write tonal music because it's so hard for singers to find their notes. Singers we're always getting dumped on.
Yeah.
But
I know.
singers are the great geniuses in our business. They don't even realize it because they have been convinced that they have resonance up here or something like that, that they are the great geniuses. There's not one other musician who every time they do something, it has to be memorized. And not only does it have to be memorized, when they're on stage, they have to remember their blocking.
Yeah.
And they have to remember to act. And they have to remember to listen to the emotions that are swirling around them. And they better not move out of the spotlight when they're supposed to be in the spotlight. They are the great geniuses. And spread the word. Because for
I'll
too long you've been downtrodden.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Yes, absolutely. I completely agree with you. Um,
Okay, good.
so sort of narrowing the scope down into the more opera related conversation here. Take us through the process of developing a new piece. Um, where do you start? How long does it take, from inspiration through to the premiere performance?
Takes me a long time because I'm very slow. Um, where does it start? Well, I mean, it's a very complicated question because, most of the time I like to write my own libretto,
Right.
but I've been fortunate to work with a very good librettist, David Mason.
Hmm.
And then there's, the question of your commission, what you're commissioned for. So each piece is different. But where does it come from? I don't know. You see something and an idea appeals to you and you say, that's drama.
Mm.
And it can be, I wrote this piece called Mayo, and in it, it's based on an article, a Life magazine article I read from 1957 or something. And in it, there was one line about a young man and a young woman holding hands. And the way the article put this and the situation they were in was so beautiful that that one moment of those two holding hands when perhaps they shouldn't have been, and when all the people around them considered it, this one action, a threat and dangerous. This one action made me think from a magazine article, it made me think there's an opera there. So opera is about moments, You got to take the bitter with the better. But we all have, whether it's Nessun Dorma or, the million other Suave Fanciulla, whatever it is, opera is about these glorious moments that you take home
Yeah.
and resonate with you for a lifetime.
Yeah.
So that's what I look for. I look for moments.
Right.
And then I can build a whole thing around those moments.
Does that
Um,
does that process change when you're commissioned to do something? Are you more hungry? Do you have things kind of floating around that you think, oh, this might work, or do you go and search for um, stories at that point?
you always you always have to find the moments.
Yeah,
Even if they're not there, you have to create them.
right.
And you have to, even if they're not readily apparent to me, I'm always looking for them.
Hmm.
What is it? That's why, everyone says it's a golden age of American opera. Maybe it is. Um, if it is, it's because there are some arias that make it the golden age. For a long time, American opera was this gray, quasi-recitative thing that, I
Right.
just I can't buy. I'm not interested in it at all.
Yeah.
You're working with these voices, they're magnificent. The artists are magnificent.
Mm.
You can work with an artist who will break your heart if you give them the right thing.
Mm.
So that's what we search for.
Yeah.
I may be being redundant now. I may have
No,
beaten my message to death.
no, not at all. So
But you know what? Madeline, don't ask me questions that are too revealing because if I figure out too much about myself while I'm doing this, I may not be able to do it anymore. It's a
no, no.
compulsion. It's a compulsion. And, and like any good compulsion, if you figure out why you have to do it,
Yeah.
it's dangerous.
Yeah, then you get too self-aware, I suppose. Yeah.
Self-aware is a terrible thing for a composer. I studied with a teacher. Um, I studied with some great, great teachers. One of the best, David Del Tredici. And he used to, an amazing, amazing musician, composer. But a lot of times he'd like to, when he was composing in the mornings, put on the Today show,
Oh,
really softly in the background, just enough to distract himself just a little bit. And I like to put on a baseball game very softly. If you listen to a baseball game, you don't listen to it really. And it's on in a minute, you're completely forgotten that it's on.
yeah.
It's just enough to get myself out of my own head.
Uh-huh.
It's a funny thing, inspiration. What is inspiration? It's when something else breathes through you. And to do that, you have to disappear for that to happen.
Yeah.
I wish I knew the secret.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. It's kind of like white noise or like a white noise machine. I can't sleep without my white noise machine because my mind is swirling, but there's something about that noise in the background that kind of drowns my brain out and I can fall asleep. Yeah. And then inspiration finds me in my dreams or something. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So 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 you turn on the baseball game and then are you
Not all the time. Not all the time. Not
okay.
all my operas have take me out to the ball game in the middle.
Right, sure.
There's
Yeah,
no
the
seventh inning
Caroline or
stretch.
something. Yeah. So when you're writing your own, if it's a case where you're writing your own libretti or libretto, do you start there and then do the music, or are they kind of doing it at the same time? How does that work?
Yeah, I start there, but it may not all be complete.
Okay.
And I change it tremendously as I go on
Okay.
because each note informs the next note that's going to happen and what's going to happen. But I have an idea what I'm going to build to. And
Okay.
I feel very funny saying that I write the libretto. I still have a lot of trauma when I even think that I could do that because there's so many great librettists around nowadays. But, I studied with another one of my great teachers, Thea Musgrave, sensational composer, great teacher,
Sure.
and still writing in her 90s, writing beautiful music. And, she wrote great operas, including Mary, Queen of Scots. And, she encouraged people who studied with her to write their own libretti because she said, only a composer, only you know what you need. And I think there's a lot of validity in that. So I do it with a great deal of trepidation and a little bit of embarrassment, but I enjoy doing it. And it seems to work for me.
Yeah.
Sometimes I just adapt pre-existing things.
Okay.
So, looking for trying to shape the drama.
Yeah.
Because the hardest thing to write is dialogue that sounds real, the way real people
Right.
talk. That's impossible for
Yeah.
me. So,
Yeah. I can imagine. I've never been good at any theater class that I'd have to take where you have to write your own monologue or something. It's always cringy. But I think you do a wonderful job. Talking about the pieces that I've sung of yours. Um, excuse me, sorry. Um, I've always felt that the text flows and the music flows together with the text. It sings very well. Um, so yeah.
thank you.
Um, yeah. My next question has to do with Hobson's Choice. So this opera is based on a movie,
No,
right?
no,
And a
I
play.
got to stop you. It's based on a
Okay.
play,
Okay.
and it really has nothing to do with the movie. But
Okay.
I mean, but of course, the movie is based on the play, but the play goes back to 1915. So I went back to that source, um, and, and it's rather important for me to think of it that way because that's really what it's based on. And
Okay.
then I decided to update it a little bit, and now it's set in Boston in the 1930s instead of England in the 19th century. But it's still the same thing: shoe store, father, kind of drunk, a little nasty, a little tyrannical, three daughters.
Yeah.
So, in a sense, Madeline, it's incredibly dated. In a sense, it's exactly the wrong thing to do, and perhaps not what anyone is looking for anymore. But we'll see. I believe in it.
Yeah.
And the heroine, Maggie, is somebody who decides to defy her father and make her own life. She wants to get married. That's her choice. But you have to sing that aria when we meet in late February, and she sings about didn't have to be a husband, didn't have to be a man, right? Could
Right.
be anything, but everybody needs love of some kind. So that's what it's about.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, um,
I know it's a comedy, on the surface, but there's a lot of heart in it, specifically in that aria. And I wanted to ask you about, you had alluded to it earlier, but one of the final things I really want to talk about is how you approach writing arias and what it is that you try to achieve musically, dramatically in the span of an aria. Um, what are your goals there?
that's good. That's great. Let me come back to that in a minute because you asked about comedy. And
Yeah.
the aria you're singing really is very serious. It's true.
Yeah.
But I believe every comedy has to have a moment that makes you cry. And
Mm,
every tragedy has to have a moment that makes you laugh.
true.
After all, in Bohème, before Mimi dies, they were all dancing a quadrille up there.
Right.
You know, there has to be something that makes you see the full spectrum of human life, or you don't care about the people.
Hmm.
So, uh, um, there are actually two instances in Hobson's Choice. I think there's an aria that the father sings later on, where he admits his mistakes. That for me was um, the most emotional part of the opera, actually. So uh, I like to have that. And then what's the second part? What do I try to do when I write an aria? Well, I have to balance the practical.
Hmm.
Here's the practical. My friend Paul Sperry, wonderful man who just passed away very recently. He gave me a clue when I was young writing an opera. He said, if you write an opera and it doesn't have acceptable arias, no one's ever going to hear from it again. This is how general directors learn about you. People go into auditions and they sing arias from your opera. If you don't have that, forget it. It's gone. And that made perfect sense to me.
Hmm.
So what do I look for? Business wise, and any composer who doesn't consider business wise when he's working is going to have a long, sad career, or a short, sad career. So I look for something that's acceptable, I want to have something 3, 4, 4.5 minutes that people can sing in auditions. Not every aria has to be that way,
Yeah.
but every opera that I write, I want to have at least one or two of those that people are going to take into an audition. So that's callous and inartistic in a way, but that's the real thing.
Yeah.
Then what do I look for? It's my job to make that singer sound sensation.
Mm.
That is my job. So it's not a byproduct of my uh, creative process. It's not something secondary. It is perhaps the first and foremost job to give them something that they can shine on
Yeah.
and sound brilliant in, and to show off what a voice can do, because the voice is like no other instrument in the world. It has these glorious things it does. It's amazing how many times you can hear people, you know, I don't want to be down, but if you don't make a, if you don't consciously try to make a soprano sound great,
Hmm.
it's like writing, it's like writing for the violin and never going on the E string. It's just you're missing out. You're
Right.
missing out on everything. So I try to do that. Now, my interest in music really is the expressiveness in tonal harmony, which sounds old-fashioned, but it's something that I still believe has a lot of life in it. And for me, that's what I like to do. That's who I am. I can't fight who I am. If I'm old-fashioned, so be it. That's what I do. And I got to drag other people along with me on my journey. That's the goal of a composer. Find out who you are and then make other people bend to your will of who you are,
Yeah. No, I
which you try
completely
to do.
agree. Yeah. I mean, your arias are just a dream to sing. Your songs are a dream to sing. It's such a gift that you give us singers. And so, on behalf of singers who have sung your music, thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
This is the nicest interview I've ever been on.
Well, I do my best. I want
Thank
to
you, Madeline. And
hear.
Madeline, no, I'm going to stop you.
Okay.
You sing beautiful. You sing beautifully. I
Well,
want everybody listening to this to know that Madeline really sings beautifully.
thank you. I'm going to excerpt that, put it on my website. Shut up. Um, great. One last question, and then we'll hit the road here. But I just wanted to. I'm curious. looking ahead, what are some projects you're most excited about, or are there any themes or stories you're eager to explore moving
All right.
forward?
That's a great question. Well, yeah, I've got like a million ideas for operas I want to do. I'm not gonna, no, I won't live long enough to do them all. But I have so many that I want to do. But I'm very excited about this comedy, Hobson's Choice, because there aren't that many comedies. And I just think it's so important. The movement has been in opera of late to deal with weighty issues that
Mm,
impact our society.
yeah.
And that's important, and we wouldn't have it any other way. And that's wonderful. But we also can't let it crowd out everything else.
Mhm.
I also believe that in a society that is as fractured as ours now, it is equally important to sit in a theater with your fellow citizens, many of whom you may disagree with,
Mhm.
but to sit there and have that shared experience of theater
Mhm.
and laughter and remind us all that we care about one another
Yeah.
and we wish each other well.
Yeah. Amen.
Uh,
Yeah.
I don't know if that is an unpopular idea, but that is something that I think is very important. Theater for theater's sake, just for the sake of sitting there and being told a story.
Yeah.
That is, I have a lot of respect for that. After all, it dates back thousands of years to somebody sitting around a fire with 30 other people saying, "Come with me on this journey I'm going to take you to." And that is still thousands of years later, the magic of the theater.
Yeah.
And for me, it's fun to think about.
Well, I think
Of
that's
course, I have to tell you, a comedy though. Am I going on too long, Madeline? You can cut me
no, no, no,
off
no.
here.
I have about
Um,
a minute left here, but
well, I
yeah.
have to say this then. Um, a comedy, nobody knows what's funny until it's in front of an audience. Even Mel Brooks doesn't know what's funny
It's true.
until it's in front of an audience. So there's a
Yeah.
lot of trepidation, but I'm keeping my fingers crossed. You can't analyze a joke. As E.B. White said, analyzing a joke is like dissecting a frog. Nobody cares, and the frog dies.
And with
So
that, I think we'll sign off. Thank you so, so much. This has been so interesting.
thank you,
I can't
Matt.
wait for people to see
So
it.
good to see you.